Good morning. Today's another one of our first fives. Today we're in Mark chapter 8, and I kind of want to look at just about the entire chapter. So I'm going to skim parts of it, but just bear with me as we kind of look at it. It begins with this: Jesus has been teaching and people have been with him for a few days, and he sees they're hungry, and he says, we need to feed them. His disciples say, where in this remote place can we get food? And so here's what happens. Jesus asked, how many loaves do you have? 7, they replied. He told the crowd to sit down on the ground. He took 7 loaves, given thanks. They even had some fish. He gave thanks, and he gave it out. And when they were done, they picked up 7 basketfuls of broken pieces. Then going on, it says that the Pharisees came and began to question Jesus. To test him, they asked him for a sign from heaven. He sighed deeply and said, why does this generation ask for a miraculous sign? I tell you the truth, no sign will be given to it. Then he left them, got back in the boat, and crossed to the other side. The disciples had forgotten to bring bread, except for 1 loaf they had with them in the boat. Be careful, Jesus warned them. Watch out for the yeast of the Pharisees and that of Herod. They discussed this with one another and said, it's because we have no bread. Aware of their discussion, Jesus asked them, why are you talking about having no bread? Do you still not see or understand? Are your hearts hardened? Do you have eyes but fail to see and ears but fail to hear? And don't you remember when I broke the 5 loaves for the 5,000? How many basketfuls of pieces did you pick up? 12, they replied. And when I broke the 7 loaves for the 4,000, how many basketfuls of pieces did you pick up? They answered, 7. He said to them, do you still not understand? And see, I love this right here because in this moment, Jesus saying a couple things that Peter and the other disciples hear and just have to at some level click. He talks about how many did we pick up when there were 5,000 people? 12. How many tribes of Israel or the whole of God's people? 12. What's the number of completion in Israel? Like sometimes we'll talk about the number 6 or even 666, about the number which really represents in the Jewish world the number of incompletion. And then the number 7 marks the number of completion. And Jesus asked them, how many basketfuls did you pick up? 12. Oh, so enough for all of God's people. How many basketfuls did you pick up? 7. Oh, enough. It's enough. 6 is always the number of incomplete. It's the number of never enough. It's the longing in us that wants more. And then after this, we see Peter confesses that Jesus must be the Christ. And then there's this part here at the end of chapter 8. Jesus says these words. If anyone would come after me, he must deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whoever wants to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for me and for the gospel will save it. What good is it for a man to gain the whole world yet forfeit his soul? Or what can a man give in exchange for his soul? If anyone is ashamed of me and my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, the Son of Man will be ashamed of him when he comes in his Father's glory with the holy angels. So what do we see in chapter 8 in Mark's gospel? We see Jesus can do what seems to be impossible. We see in this moment that he provides enough. And he provides enough for all of God's people. And he's not really talking about food or yeast. He's talking about the reality of our heart. Do we trust that he's enough? Are we willing to live in such a way that throughout this day we know Jesus is enough? Or just like the number 6, or 666, or just like those who are concerned that only 1 loaf of bread's enough, are we willing to say, you're enough for this day? You're enough for all your people. 12 is the mark of completion of the people of God. And so 7, the mark of completion. It's the 7 days of creation. It was enough. It was good. And so this invitation for us today is to say, Jesus, we trust that you are enough. That we want to recognize you're enough. That you really are the Christ, as Peter says in the middle of this chapter. But we also want to get to the place in our lives where we say, I'm going to lay down my life for your sake. And that, I think, is the greater question you and I are left to answer today. Are we willing to lay down our life for the sake of Jesus? Or are we going to keep seeking after things that are never going to be enough, they're never going to fill us, they're never going to be completed, but we're going to go our own way? Or are we going to trust that we can trust in Jesus? And it doesn't matter, as these words, whoever was to save his life will lose it. Whoever loses his life for me and for the gospel will save it. What good is it a man for the gain the whole world and yet forfeit his soul? So what if you and I don't seek for all kinds of stuff out there, but we allow God to shape us in here, so that the way God shapes us then impacts how we live? And we do that because we recognize that Jesus is the Christ and he provides enough. We'll see you next time.